Welcome, guys. I decided to have a little chat with one of my beloved colleagues, someone I'm extremely fond of, very close to. We chat often and we talk about all kinds of things. I wanted to introduce Matt Elliot, who is, as I said, a friend and a colleague. He's also a faculty member at the Radiant Sutra School of Meditation. He was a teaching and research academic in the field of learning. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful sunny Australian morning here.
So the topic of discussion today is unpacking rebellion. I feel like, and I can't help smiling because for me, rebelliousness or being a rebel just feels like second nature, as it does to a lot of us. And a quote I want to read that was written by Norman Mailer says, "Because of the instinct of rebellion, man has never been content with the limits of his mind. It has led him to inquire its secrets of the universe, to gather and learn and manipulate the fabulous inventory of the cosmos, to seek the very mysteries of creation." Now, with Matt, I always have incredibly delicious and deep discussions. And I want to ask you right off the bat, Matt. Right off the bat, Matt, there's a little rhyme right there for you.
You.
How What is rebelliousness to you? What does being a rebel mean to you in your life
Oh,
and as you've seen it in the world?
oh gosh, that's such a wide-ranging question. Well, I think, we all come into a family, and families have varying degrees of narratives. And some of them are very restrictive. You will believe what we believe. You will act the way we act. Some of them are very liberating, giving support for people to go out in the world and have their own experiences, and then to come back and share those experiences and learn about them. So that act of leaving the home space and being open to new experiences is sometimes what we call rebellion. And the word rebellion, has some kind of violence within it, some kind of a tearing away from the known and from the accepted. And we all have to do that at some point in our lives. I don't think boundaries are created. True boundaries are created until we know we can rebel. We can say, this is not me anymore. And so for me, rebellion kind of exists in a balance, a duality with belonging and with acceptance. And a healthy individual, I think, has those in balance within them, the acceptance and belonging and the rebellion, both parts. Do you agree or disagree?
No, I agree. I agree very much. And I'm also still thinking about the insinuation of violence with the word rebellion. And it comes to mind that rebellion it's almost like the original war cry. It's the first voice of resistance, the untamed self that is seeking expression or feeling repressed or feeling controlled or contrived by forces outside of itself. So yes, rebellion in a political and a geopolitical and a socio-economic sense can take on some kind of violent face. But as far as the individual goes, it's certainly the original war cry, I feel. Almost like when a child is born, the first yell or the first scream is almost like, well, the dark womb of comfort was taken away as you are purged into this world where, you know, you're completely vulnerable. And so I hear you use the word boundaries and belonging, and vulnerable just came out of my mouth. So these are topics you and I have talked about quite extensively. And it feels like they're all woven into, they're all part and parcel of this journey of recognizing and knowing your inner rebellion or rebel.
And I think I'd add courage to that mix. Also, having the courage to rebel. But it takes courage to step away from the cultural narrative of what's right and what's true. And the challenge is when we do that, when we step out of what the culture is telling us to do, if we don't stay with our own vulnerability, we don't stay with our own openness to the new, we can become very influenced by other people. In this strange world in which we live, it takes courage to follow our own paths, to not look for a new community that will reify what we think is true, but to stay vulnerable and to stay in the moment and have courage, I think is very important.
When you break away from the norm, you're likely to find people who may join forces with you, may agree with you, and then you start to, find yourself drawn to them, or you kind of band together in some ways and become a movement. But what I was interested also was I found that there was research in neuroscience that revealed that people's ability to stand up to, say, social influence or whatever they're rebelling against is reflected in an anatomical difference in the brain between them and people who don't really stand up against social influence. And so people who are more concerned with fitting in, they have shown more gray matter volume in one particular part of their brain. And this area right behind the eyebrows creates memories of events that led to negative outcomes. And people who are more concerned about conforming to their group also show more activity in two other brain circuits. One that responds to social pain, so I would imagine more like empathy, and another that tries to understand another's thoughts and feelings, which is also empathy or compassion. So they have more activity in that part of their brain. So it was very interesting to me that, for instance, you mentioned earlier how people are raised, what kind of cultural or family norm system they're growing up in, and how that influences them. But I have noticed that within a family unit, there'll be siblings, and some will show tendencies of rebellion, and some will show tendency of being, they will become submissive and give in. One child will say no, they'll stand up to authority, and the other may succumb. So it was interesting to notice that it's also a biological phenomenon. Why some people, yeah.
Absolutely. And so here we are in this world. And we have varying degrees of rebelliousness, like as you said, almost from from a physiological and neurological point of view. And the question arises, what is healthy rebellion? So and of course that's a loaded question, because it depends upon who's making that judgment. But for you and I in this conversation, what denotes healthy rebellion from destructive rebellion on an individual personal level?
I love that question. I really do. And I will say, for me, for instance, growing up as a South Asian woman in a conservative household, I believe rebellion at a young age was destructive in nature, because when you're young and you have zest and too much emotion and not effective tools to channel it appropriately, it is bound to misfire and backfire on you. And it did in my case. However, over the years, and especially through the training and the teaching and the work that I have done with Lauren Roche and the Sufi school, the Sufi trainings, and my own meditations, the more I've gotten to know myself, the more I have understood and made peace with all the parts of myself that I was not in accord with, the more I have moved into life-affirming rebellion. So I moved away as a result from things that were self-destructive to things that are more self-affirming. The essence and the current is still the same. It's still the fire, it's still Durga energy, it's still rebellion. But in knowing myself and understanding that, in fact, if I go blindly on this path and just act on instinct without processing and channeling my energy appropriately, I'm causing more harm than I'm causing any good and doing any good. So ultimately, and in everything in life, Matt, tell me if you feel this happens to you, but pretty much in any circumstance of life, in any challenge, any new situation, work or otherwise, personal, interpersonal, the only thing that all guns point at eventually, or all fingers point at, is your own self. And how much of yourself do you know? Everything ultimately takes you, all roads lead to Rome. It just takes you back to, well, what do I know about myself? And it is that self-discovery that makes you understand that, well, this is how I'm programmed. This is the energy I've come with. This is how I feel. These are the things I feel passionately about and I'm courageous about. But how can I use these things to further my cause without harming anyone, and if at all, doing good along the way? So it has taken self-reflection to get to that point, that place, to understand, move away from destructive rebellion to constructive rebellion.
And so here's a question that doesn't have an answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Was your destructive rebellion necessary for you at a young age?
Yeah. I'll tell you, I actually do. It's a spontaneous answer. And the answer is yes. Oddly, we said rebellion, vulnerability, boundaries, courage. All these seem like they belong in the same family. And at the same time, passion. Rebellion carries that intensity of passion. And it's often anger, rebellion, or resistance. It's a resistance to authority. And it comes from a place of wanting to stand up to authority. And there's anger that is backing that emotion. It's somehow you feel diminished and you feel like there's a fire in you that needs to rise up. And so there is already a force there. Unfortunately, at that age, it felt like it needed to create the destruction it did for me to stop and take stock of what in God's name was going on, and how could I reassess my path and switch direction with that same force instead of towards me, more towards a productive outcome. So
I would say the same is true for me. So my background is obviously very different than yours. Middle class family in the U.S., very dysfunctional, lots of psychological and physical trauma. So my rebelliousness came later in life. I'd say in my early 20s, because mostly when I was at home, I was hiding, right? I was hiding from what was happening. And from the outside, people would say I was acting out. I was doing lots of drugs, I was partying, I was doing all this kind of stuff. But it was in its own way a rebellion. It was a rebellion against the strange, traumatic control in my family. And it was a rebellion against, no, I'll go back. It was a rebellion against that kind of control. And was it destructive? It was more destructive for me than it was for other people. Um, and yes, I found a group of people that were happy to party with me and talk about alternative politics and punk music and all this kind of stuff. And it was only after I'd gotten some of that anger out of my system that I was able to start to think about what's important to me rather than acting in response to my earlier conditioning. But I think some of that in the whole life stream, some of that can be necessary for a lot of us. Some of that more negative, more destructive rebellion is important.
And we need that. We need to question. I think it's heartbreaking that in every culture, in every society, the child that acts out or is rebellious is seen as the problem child or the difficult one. Whereas I really think that if we all were just going to conform to rules and regulations as they've been handed down, what an awfully sterile society we would have, with no color and no flavor and no sharp edges and probably no art or poetry or heartbreak to speak of to write about.
Yes. Yes, writing about it is an act of rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I do want to do is introduce or feel into a meditation where we can welcome the inner rebel. And for me, that looks something like deep acceptance.
I would start that meditation with, and you're absolutely right, deep acceptance, but tuning into that inner rebel. And sometimes when I teach, I will actually have someone like put a hand out and take a look at it. What would that look like in your hand? What would that feel like? Would it be solid? Would it be light? Would it be moving? Would it be still? Is it healthy and active? Is it wounded? Because how we relate to that inner rebel brings about its own health. It's an essential part of who we are. And so acceptance, deep acceptance, as you said, it's like, but let's get to know, to start that by getting to know what that inner rebel is or how it feels. What's the temperature? What's the mood,
The texture,
the
the
texture?
feel, yes, the consistency. And also for different people, it's different things. For someone, it may show up as a young adult. For some, it may show up as your inner child.
Yes.
Which part of you stands up to that authority or that voice that you hear that says no more often than it says yes to you? And what does that feel like inside you? And perhaps feeling into that space is a beautiful way to start. Yes.
And the rebel, the inner rebel is always is in touch with how our lives are going. Always. And always has a response.
Isn't it the truest voice inside you? Isn't it absolutely your truest truth inside of you? Because it is that spontaneous response to a statement that just at an inherent level, at a deep instinctive level, didn't sit well.
Well, I think there are other voices that are all very true. But the rebel is unafraid of dishing down some hard truth. You know, don't trust this person. Go in this direction.
Yeah.
It's very immediate.
Yeah. And it has
It
a power of its own.
yes, yes, it does. And so let's just take a moment and feel the compelling nature of that inner rebel self. And let's play with the idea of constructive and destructive elements to that.
Mm.
For some people listening or watching this video, it may feel more destructive because it hasn't been allowed to live in the world. And so its tools are primitive. And for some people who are watching, the inner rebel will be more constructive and will be choosing things that will bring health and wholeness into our lives, even when it is being rebellious.
Mm. It is like really slowing down and feeling into where you're seated and feeling your weight um, give into gravity and truly meeting your inner rebel, perhaps even for the first time for some of us, um, and not feeling embarrassed or ashamed or called out for it, but accepting that it is a very important part of what makes up who you are. And so just honoring, just taking a moment to honor that inner self. And I also feel that perhaps if it is destructive at this stage for you, or has a force that seems it cannot be tamed, even just meeting with that energy and knowing that you are here with all your presence and attention, gazing towards it, acknowledging its existence, honoring it for what gifts and strengths and courage it brings to you is an invitation to soften that destruction a little bit.
And I loved when you used the word passion, that the inner rebel, whether destructive or constructive, has a passion for life, has a passion for what it sees as justice, and has a passion for engagement with life. The rebel doesn't want to live solely in an intellectual way. It wants to reach out and touch and move and dance and be. So as you reflect inside about the inner rebel, feel its passion. Its passion for living.
Oh, I love this so much. I love this so much. Yeah, sometimes all that's really needed is to make the space and the time for the things inside that really matter a lot, that have gone, that have been dismissed and diminished by us. And then we wonder, why the self-esteem issues and all the other things that we carry along, but we ourselves diminish parts of ourselves, of us. So thank you, Matt, so much for this insight and this conversation and this meditation. It was really, really incredible to dive into this with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was a great co-creation. I think my last words would be to cultivate a relationship with your inner rebel, to live as if that person was inside of you or walking next to you, to learn to listen, to learn to enact what you hear. Because it's a, as we said, it's a powerful and constructive force within us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it just, even the words that you use just immediately feel so liberating. Giving yourself that permission is so liberating.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I hope you enjoy delving into this meditation and spending time with it. And if you have any thoughts or comments, please send them in the comments below. And we look forward to having more chats with Matt in the coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would love it. I would love it. Thank you. Thank you. It's been great being here. Thank you.